I'm holding the letters when he finds me. My hand shakes so badly the pages rustle like dying leaves, and I can't stop reading the same lines over and over. The girl knows nothing. She's controllable. Once we're married, Vincent's territory becomes mine. My fingers have gone numb. The aspirin bottle I'd been searching for lies shattered at my feet, white pills scattered across the dark marble like teeth. Isabella. His voice comes from the doorway, careful and controlled, and when I turn, Dominic stands there in his shirt sleeves, tie loosened, looking at me with an expression I've never seen before. Not surprise. Resignation. Like he's been waiting for this moment, preparing for it. And now that it's here, he's almost relieved. You weren't supposed to find those. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not denial. Not explanation. Just that flat acknowledgement that I've discovered something I was meant to stay ignorant of forever. You killed my father. My voice breaks on the words. The letters flutter to the floor between us, months of correspondence between my husband and my dying father, clinical discussions of territories and timelines, and the most efficient way to accelerate a sick man's death. Make it look natural, one letter says. I need you gone, Vincent. Your death legitimizes everything. Dominic takes a step forward and I back against his desk, trapped between mahogany and the man I thought I was learning to love. He stops when he sees my fear, his jaw tightening, his hands flexing at his sides like he's physically restraining himself from reaching for me. I freed you, he says quietly. Vincent was using you as a bargaining chip. I gave you power, status, protection. You gave me a lie. Tears burn my eyes, but I won't let them fall. Not yet. Not where he can see how completely he's destroyed me. Everything, the obsession, the devotion, the way you suddenly couldn't live without me, it was all to keep me from discovering what you did. No. The word comes out harsh, desperate. Dominic does reach for me then, and I flinch away. The pain that crosses his face looks genuine, which somehow makes it worse. It started that way. But Isabella, what I feel now, what we've become, that's real, is built on my father's grave. I shove past him, letters scattering under my feet, and make it 3 steps toward the door before his hand closes around my wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop me, to spin me back around to face him. His eyes are wild, that barely restrained violence I've only seen once before now directed fully at me. You're not leaving me. Watch me. I will burn this city down before I let you walk away. His grip tightens just slightly, just enough to terrify. You're mine, Isabella. Mine. And I will do whatever it takes, destroy whoever I need to, kill anyone who tries to help you, because losing you is not an option I can survive. To control me, I whisper, wrenching my wrist free. To own me. That's all this ever was. The elevator is 10 feet away. I back toward it, keeping my eyes on him, watching him fracture in real time. The legendary controls slipping, the mask cracking, the monster underneath finally visible. Let me tell you how this really started, he says, his voice dropping to something raw and broken. Let me tell you the truth about everything. The elevator doors open behind me and I step inside without turning around. The last thing I see before they close is Dominic's devastated expression, his hand reaching out like he can pull me back through sheer force of will. I don't trust it. I don't trust anything anymore. If you love stories where obsession becomes salvation, stay with me. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Because you're about to understand why some loves are built on lies, and why that makes them more dangerous than the truth could ever be. 8 months earlier, I stood in front of the mirror in my childhood bedroom and tried to recognize myself. The woman staring back wore a white Alexander McQueen gown that cost more than most people's cars. Her dark hair swept up in an intricate style that had taken 2 hours to achieve. She looked like a bride. She looked like a prisoner dressed for execution. 23 years old, and this was supposed to be the beginning of my life. Instead, it felt like an ending. My father was dying. Lung cancer, stage 4, spreading faster than the doctors could track. Vincent Moretti had maybe 6 months, and he was spending his remaining time securing his legacy the only way he knew how. Through blood, through power, through trading his youngest daughter like she was just another territory to be consolidated. Dominic Russo wanted Brooklyn. My father wanted his empire to survive him. I was the price that made both men happy. The wedding was small, intimate, just family and close associates, which in our world meant 200 people who could kill you as easily as shake your hand. I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, feeling his weight lean heavily against me, hearing his labored breathing under the classical music. He was dying, and he was using his last breaths to give me away. Dominic stood at the altar in a black Tom Ford suit, looking like he'd been carved from marble. 35 years old, already a legend in our world. The man who'd taken the Russo family from street-level operations to legitimate business fronts that made him untouchable. He was beautiful in a cold, dangerous way, all sharp angles and controlled power. He barely looked at me during the ceremony. I repeated vows I didn't mean to a man who didn't want to hear them. His hands were steady when he slipped the ring on my finger. Mine trembled. When he kissed me, it was perfunctory, barely a brush of lips, like checking off a required box on a contract. The reception passed in a blur of champagne and congratulations and business deals disguised as toasts. Dominic spent the entire time across the room from me, deep in conversation with men whose names I knew, but whose faces I'd learned not to remember. He introduced me twice, his hand proprietarily at my waist, his voice flat when he said my wife like it was just another title in his extensive collection. We didn't speak in the car to his penthouse. The driver knew better than to make small talk. I stared out the window at Manhattan's glittering skyline and wondered if you could die from loneliness while sitting 3 feet from another person. The penthouse was everything I'd expected. Sleek, modern, expensive, utterly devoid of warmth. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lower Manhattan. All glass and steel and imported marble. A showpiece, not a home. Dominic poured himself 3 fingers of scotch the moment we walked in, downing it in one swallow, before pouring another. I stood in the doorway in my wedding dress, my feet aching from 4-inch heels, watching him refuse to look at me. "This changes nothing between us," he said finally, his back still turned. "You'll have your own wing, your own life. Stay out of my business, and we won't have problems." The dismissal in his voice was worse than anger would have been. At least anger would have meant I registered as something worth feeling emotion about. "Where should I sleep?" I asked quietly. "East Wing, 2nd floor. Rosa will show you in the morning." He still hadn't turned around. "Tonight?" He did turn then, his gray eyes meeting mine with all the warmth of a winter storm. "Tonight, I fulfill my obligation to this marriage. Tomorrow we go back to being strangers who share an address." It was efficient, clinical, exactly what he'd promised. Afterward, he disappeared into the bathroom, and I lay in the massive bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the ring on my finger like a shackle. When he came back out, he was already dressed, his hair still damp, his face expressionless. "Rosa's room is next to the kitchen, if you need anything. I'll be out most nights. Don't wait up." He left, and I was alone in a stranger's bedroom, wearing a stranger's ring, wondering how you could feel so utterly erased while still technically existing. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. This gets darker, I promise you that. The first 6 months of marriage, I became an expert in invisibility. I learned the rhythm of Dominic's life through absence, through the spaces he left behind. His cologne lingering in hallways I never saw him walk through. His coffee cup in the sink, still warm when I came down for breakfast. The sound of his voice behind closed doors, always business, always controlled. Rosa was kind in a professional way, making sure I had everything I needed while maintaining careful distance. She'd worked for the Russo family for 20 years, and she knew the rules. Don't get attached. Don't ask questions. Don't notice the blood on shirt cuffs or the way the boss came home at dawn smelling like gunpowder. I filled my days with charity work that Dominic's people vetted but never questioned. Art gallery events, fundraisers for causes I actually cared about, anything to get out of the penthouse that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. I had security, always, discreet men in black suits who kept their distance, but never let me out of their sight. My father's health declined in increments. Each week he looked grayer, thinner, more transparent. I visited him every Sunday, sitting beside his bed in the brownstone I'd grown up in, holding his hand while he drifted in and out of consciousness. He never apologized for selling me, never acknowledged that he'd traded my life for his legacy. But sometimes, in his lucid moments, he'd squeeze my fingers and whisper, "Be strong, little one," like strength could fill the hollow space where love should have been. Dominic never came with me to these visits, never asked about my father's condition. But I noticed things. The way he'd come home agitated on Sunday nights, pacing the penthouse like a caged animal. The way he'd pour extra scotch, his movements sharp and angry. The way he'd disappear into his office and not emerge until morning. I noticed other things too. Marcus Kane, Dominic's second in command, had a way of watching me when he thought no one was looking. Not with desire, but with calculation, like he was measuring something, assessing worth. He came to the penthouse frequently, always for business, always closeted with Dominic behind locked doors. But sometimes if I was in the library or the kitchen, he'd find me, make small talk that felt like reconnaissance, ask careful questions about my father's health, about whether I was happy, about what I did with my time. I learned to give him nothing. I learned that in this world, information was currency, and I was already bought and paid for. 3 weeks before everything changed, I was reading in the library when I heard raised voices from Dominic's office. The walls were thick, but anger had a way of traveling through expensive construction. I couldn't make out words, but I recognized tones. Dominic's cold fury. Marcus's defensive aggression. The argument went on for 20 minutes before a door slammed and footsteps retreated. That night, Dominic came to dinner for the first time in months. Rosa had set 2 places at the long dining table, looking surprised when he actually sat down across from me. We ate in silence for 10 minutes before he spoke. "How's your father?" The question startled me. He'd never asked before. "Dying," I said, because there was no point in softening it. "Maybe 2 months left." Something flickered in his eyes, too quick to identify. "I'm sorry. Are you?" He set down his fork, those gray eyes focusing on me with an intensity that made my breath catch. Despite everything, despite the coldness and the distance and the contractual nature of our marriage, Dominic was beautiful. Dangerous and cold and absolutely beautiful. "I'm sorry you're losing him," he said carefully. "I'm not sorry for the alliance his death will secure. At least you're honest." "I'm always honest. It's everyone else who lies." He left before dessert and I sat alone at the table, wondering if that was the longest conversation we'd ever had. The day everything fractured started ordinary. I was in the library, sunlight streaming through the windows, lost in a book about Renaissance art. Dreaming, as I often did, about the life I'd wanted before my father traded it away. Florence, studying in museums instead of just reading about them. Building something that was mine instead of being possessed by powerful men. Mrs. Russo. I looked up to find Marcus in the doorway, his smile easy and practiced. The kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Rosa's running errands," he said, moving into the room uninvited. "Dominic's in Jersey handling the Costello situation." My spine prickled with instinct. I stood, marking my page carefully, buying time to think. I should call him. Make sure he doesn't need anything. He doesn't need anything except to stop pretending this marriage is something it's not. Marcus closed the distance between us, and I backed against the bookshelf, my heart starting to hammer. "I'm just saying," he continued, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. "You have options, Isabella. You've always had options. Your husband doesn't deserve you. Everyone knows it. I should call Rosa. Rosa's busy. Dominic's busy. Right now it's just us, and I think it's time someone told you the truth about what you really are to him. Get out." The voice came from the doorway, cold as a killing frost, and we both turned to find Dominic standing there. I'd never seen him look like this. Face white with rage, body coiled with violence barely restrained, eyes burning with something that looked almost feral. Marcus left without another word, that practiced smile still in place, but I saw the calculation in his eyes as he passed Dominic. Whatever test this was, I wasn't sure if I'd passed or failed. The silence after he left was deafening. Did he touch you? Dominic's voice was lethal calm, the kind of quiet that came before explosions. He crossed the room with measured steps, each one deliberate, controlled, barely containing whatever was roiling underneath. No, I managed. He just said, "Did he fucking touch you?" The intensity in his eyes shocked me. For 8 months he treated me like furniture, like an inconvenient obligation. And now he looked at me like I was something breakable, something precious, something his. The shift was so sudden I couldn't process it. "No," I whispered. "He didn't touch me." Dominic's hands flexed, his jaw working. For a long moment he just stared at me, something warring in his expression. Then he turned away, running both hands through his hair, his careful control fracturing at the edges. "Stay away from Marcus," he said, his back to me. "That's not a request." "Why? What's happening?" "Nothing that concerns you. Everything about your business concerns me if I'm married to you." He turned back, and the look he gave me was complicated, layered with things I couldn't name. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're absolutely right." "Then tell me." "I can't." He left before I could respond, but something fundamental had shifted. The invisible wife had become visible, and in our world, visibility was its own kind of danger. "You think you know where this is going. Trust me, you don't. What time is it where you are? You're going to need to keep listening." Marcus disappeared 2 days later. Just vanished from Dominic's operations without explanation, without announcement, like he'd never existed. The men didn't talk about it. Rosa didn't mention it. When I asked Dominic, his expression went cold. "He's not your concern." But the way he said it, the flat finality in his voice, told me everything I needed to know. Marcus had gotten too close, had said too much, had threatened something Dominic protected, and now he was gone. I should have been terrified. Instead, some dark part of me felt protected. Everything changed after that. Dominic started coming home, not just physically returning to the penthouse, but actually being present. He'd appear in the library doorway, watching me read with an intensity that made my skin prickle. He'd pour 2 glasses of wine instead of 1, settling into the chair across from mine. "What are you reading?" he'd ask. And I'd tell him, cautious at first, expecting the conversation to die. But he'd ask follow-up questions, real questions, like he actually wanted to understand what I thought about Renaissance patronage systems or Caravaggio's use of darkness. He fired 3 men that week for looking at me too long. I heard about it from Rosa, who heard it from the housekeeping staff, who heard it from someone's cousin who worked security. Just fired them, no explanation. Sent them away with severance packages and warnings never to come back. When I confronted him about it, he was in his office, shirt sleeves rolled up, working through a stack of contracts. "You can't fire people for looking at me," I said from the doorway. "I can do whatever I want." He didn't look up. "They work for me." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point, Isabella?" The use of my name, not Mrs. Russo, made my heart skip. "That you're suddenly behaving like a possessive husband when you've barely acknowledged my existence for 8 months. He did look up then, setting down his pen with careful precision. "Come here." It wasn't a request. I crossed to his desk, my pulse quickening, not entirely sure if I was walking toward danger or something else entirely. He studied me for a long moment, those gray eyes tracking over my face like he was memorizing details he'd been too indifferent to notice before. "I've been doing this wrong," he said finally. "All of it. From the beginning." "Doing what wrong?" "Us." "There is no us," I reminded him, but my voice came out softer than intended. "You made that clear on our wedding night." I was wrong. The admission hung between us. Dominic stood, moving around the desk, and suddenly he was close enough that I could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I was wrong about everything," he continued quietly. "About what this marriage could be. About what I wanted from it. About you." His hand came up to cup my face, thumb brushing my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "I always cared, Isabella. I just didn't know how much until someone else wanted you." The confession made something crack open in my chest. 8 months of loneliness and rejection suddenly reframed. "You're saying you were jealous." "I'm saying I was terrified." "Of what?" "Of this." He kissed me then, and it was nothing like our wedding night. This kiss was desperate, hungry, 8 months of denied want pouring into it. His hands framed my face like I was something precious, his lips moving against mine like I was oxygen and he'd been drowning. I kissed him back with equal fervor, my fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer, needing to believe this was real even though warning bells were screaming in the back of my mind. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against mine. "Let me do this right," he murmured. "Let me show you what this marriage could be." I should have said no. Should have demanded answers about Marcus, about the sudden shift, about what had really changed. But I'd been invisible for so long, and the weight of his attention felt like proof that I existed. "Okay," I whispered. It was the most dangerous word I'd ever spoken. The next 3 months were a fever dream. Dominic became obsessed, and I drowned in the attention I'd been starving for. He couldn't stand to be apart from me. Would pull me into his office during business meetings just to have me near. Would bring me to family dinners, keeping me close with his hand at my waist like a brand. The sex was consuming. Not gentle or tender but desperate, almost violent in its intensity. He'd wake me at 3 in the morning, his hands already under my nightgown, his mouth hot against my neck. "Say you're mine," he'd demand in the darkness, his fingers bruising my hips. "Say it, Isabella." And I would. I'd say it and mean it, lost in the proof that I mattered, that I was wanted, that I was his. But there were moments, brief flickers, when something felt wrong. The way he watched me when he thought I wasn't looking, his expression complicated and almost guilty. The way he'd pull me closer when my father's name came up, like he was trying to physically hold me against some coming storm. My father died in October. I got the call at 4 in the morning. Rosa waking me gently, telling me I needed to come home. Dominic drove me himself, his hand gripping mine the entire way, not speaking, but there, solid and present. Vincent Moretti died peacefully in his sleep, the doctor said. The cancer had finally won. It was expected, they assured me. Natural progression. I sobbed into Dominic's chest, and he held me through it, whispering promises against my hair about protection and forever, and how he'd never let anything hurt me again. The funeral was huge, every major family in New York represented. Dominic never left my side, his arm around my waist, his body between me and anyone who came too close. He spoke at the service, his eulogy perfectly crafted, full of respect for a man who'd built an empire and secured his legacy. The Moretti territory transferred seamlessly into Russo control. The old alliances fell in line. My father's legacy was absorbed into Dominic's growing empire. Everything happening so smoothly, it was like it had been choreographed. I was too lost in grief to notice the timing. Too distracted by Dominic's constant devotion to see the orchestration underneath. But I should have. I should have noticed that every major decision in my life had been controlled, calculated, and perfectly executed. I should have wondered why Marcus had disappeared right before Dominic's sudden obsession began. Should have questioned how my father's death had been so convenient, so perfectly timed. I should have, but I didn't. Because I was falling in love with my husband, and love made you blind to the obvious. If your heart is racing, you're exactly where you need to be. Stay with me. This is where everything breaks. 2 months after my father's funeral, I woke up nauseous for the 3rd morning in a row. Dominic was already awake, propped against the headboard with his tablet, reading through business reports. He looked up when I bolted for the bathroom, his expression immediately concerned. "Isabella?" He followed me, finding me on the floor next to the toilet, my whole body shaking. "Talk to me. What's wrong?" "I don't know," I managed, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. "I've been feeling sick for days." Something shifted in his eyes, a flash of hope and fear mixing together. "Could you be pregnant?" The question hadn't even occurred to me. We'd never discussed children, never talked about wanting them or not wanting them. It had just been assumed, I realized. Of course, we'd have heirs. Of course, I'd give him children. That's what wives in our world did. "Maybe," I whispered. He was on the phone within minutes, calling his doctor, demanding a house call immediately. Dr. Chen arrived an hour later with a medical bag and a discreet smile, taking blood samples and asking gentle questions, while Dominic paced the bedroom like a caged animal. The test came back positive. I was 6 weeks pregnant. Dominic's face transformed, all the cold control melting into something raw and vulnerable and almost childlike in its joy. He pulled me into his arms, lifting me off my feet, laughing against my hair. "We're having a baby," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "Christo, Isabella, we're going to be parents." I held on to him, letting his happiness wash over me, trying to feel the joy I knew I should feel. But something nagged at the edges of my consciousness. Some instinct screaming that the timing was too perfect, too convenient. 8 weeks pregnant meant I'd conceived right around the time Marcus disappeared. Right around the time Dominic's attention had shifted from dismissal to obsession. Right around the time everything had changed. But I pushed the thought away. Refused to let paranoia poison this moment. Dominic was happy. I was happy. We were building something real, despite the transactional beginning. I was lying to myself, and somewhere deep down I knew it. The pregnancy changed everything again. Dominic became impossibly protective, hovering constantly, hiring a nutritionist, doubling my security detail, personally vetting every doctor's appointment. He held me like I was made of glass, whispered to my still flat stomach, like he could communicate with a tiny life growing inside me. We'd sit together in the evenings, his hand resting on my abdomen, talking about names and nurseries and what kind of parents we wanted to be. He told me about his own father, cold and brutal, and swore our child would never know that kind of fear. I told him about my mother, who died when I was 12, and promised I'd be stronger than she'd been. We were building a future, I thought. Building something real out of the wreckage of our arrangement. But there were still moments when I'd catch him watching me with that complicated expression, guilt and longing and something darker mixed together. Moments when he'd pull me close almost violently, like he was trying to physically hold onto something slipping away. "I want you to have everything," he said one night, his arms tight around me. "The penthouse, the businesses, access to all the accounts. My lawyer is drawing up new documents. Everything in my name becomes joint ownership." "Dominic, that's not necessary." "It is." He pulled back enough to look at me, his gray eyes intense. "This life is dangerous. If something happens to me, I need to know you're protected. Powerful enough that no one would dare touch you. Nothing's going to happen to you. You don't know that." His hand found my stomach, cradling the small bump beginning to show. "I need you safe. Both of you. Even if that means protecting you from me." The words sent ice down my spine. "From you? What does that mean?" "Just promise me," he said instead of answering. "Promise that if you ever find out something about me, something terrible, you'll remember this moment. Remember that I loved you. That I love our baby. That everything I've done was to keep you safe. You're scaring me." "Good." He kissed me then, desperate and almost punishing, like he was trying to brand himself onto my soul before something ripped us apart. I should have demanded answers. Should have pushed until he told me what terrible thing he thought I'd discover. But I was pregnant and exhausted and so desperate to believe in the future we were building that I let it go. It was the last mistake I'd make. Are you listening alone? It's okay if you are. Sometimes the darkest stories are meant for solitary moments. What's about to happen will explain everything. 3 weeks later, I was looking for aspirin. Simple as that. I had a headache that wouldn't quit, the kind that made my vision blur at the edges, and I checked everywhere. The bathroom cabinets, the kitchen, Rosa's carefully organized medicine drawer. Nothing. Dominic was out, some meeting in the financial district. The penthouse was quiet except for the constant hum of the city 20 floors below. I'd been avoiding his office out of habit, respecting his space the way I'd been trained to respect powerful men's boundaries. But my head was pounding, and I was desperate, and I remembered seeing a bottle in his desk drawer weeks ago when he'd offer me Tylenol. The office was exactly as he'd left it that morning. Tablet charging on the desk, coffee cup still half full, his jacket draped over the leather chair. I crossed the desk, opening the drawer where I remembered seeing the aspirin. It wasn't there, but something else was. A leather portfolio I'd never seen before, expensive and worn, tucked in the back of the drawer like it had been hidden but not hidden enough. I should have closed the drawer. Should have left and found aspirin somewhere else. But my fingers were already reaching for it, some instinct screaming that whatever was inside would matter. The portfolio held letters. Dozens of them, printed correspondence dating back over a year. I recognized the signatures immediately. My father's shaky handwriting. Dominic's bold script. I started reading. The world tilted on its axis. The girl knows nothing. One letter said in Dominic's handwriting. She's controllable. Young enough to mold. Isolated enough to depend entirely on the marriage for identity. Her father has no other viable heirs, and she has no concept of the business. Perfect for what we need. My father's response, excellent. The wedding should happen quickly. My doctors give me less time than I'd hoped. More letters. Clinical discussions of territory transfers, of consolidating power, of timelines and strategic advantages. They discussed me like I was a chess piece, something to be positioned for maximum benefit. Then I found the letter dated 3 weeks after my wedding. The one that made my knees buckle. Marcus is pushing me to expedite the timeline, Dominic had written. He wants the Moretti connections severed before someone else can claim them. He's right, of course. The longer you linger, the more complicated the transition becomes. I need you gone, Vincent. Your death legitimizes everything, makes the consolidation unquestionable. My father's response was brief. I understand. Do what needs to be done. Just make sure my daughter never knows. Below that, in Dominic's handwriting, a final line. Dr. Chen can adjust the medication. It will look like natural progression. No one will question it. The aspirin bottle slipped from my other hand, hitting the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. Pills scattered everywhere, white against black, like stars against a void. My father hadn't died from cancer. Dominic had killed him, had accelerated his death, adjusted his medication, made murder look like mercy. And Marcus had known. That's why he'd approached me in the library, why he'd said I had options, why he'd started telling me the truth. He discovered what Dominic had done and threatened to expose it. So Dominic had eliminated him and shifted tactics, had manufactured the obsession, the devotion, the desperate love, all to keep me distracted and compliant, had made me fall for him so deeply that I'd never think to question the timing, the convenience, the too smooth consolidation of power. The pregnancy, I realized with sick horror. The pregnancy had been part of it too. Getting me pregnant bound me to him legally, emotionally, permanently, made me complicit in his empire, gave him leverage that went beyond mere territory. Everything had been calculated. Every moment of tenderness, every whispered promise, every desperate touch in the darkness. All of it orchestrated to transform me from invisible wife to devoted accomplice, too invested to ever look too closely at what he'd done. I heard footsteps in the hallway, heard his voice calling my name. Isabella? I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only stand there with the letters at my feet, my whole world crumbling around the edges. Dominic appeared in the doorway and stopped. His eyes went to the letters, to the shattered aspirin bottle, to my face. And I watched him make the calculation, watched him assess the situation and choose his response. You weren't supposed to find those, he said quietly. Not denial, not panic, just that careful acknowledgement that I'd discovered the truth he'd been hiding. You killed my father. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Someone who wasn't standing in her murderer's office, carrying his child. I freed you, Dominic said, stepping into the room. Vincent was dying anyway. I just expedited what was inevitable. And in return I gave you power, protection, a position that made you untouchable. You gave me a lie. The tears came then, hot and angry, streaming down my face. Everything. The obsession, the devotion, the way you suddenly couldn't live without me. It was all to keep me from discovering what you did. No. He moved toward me, and I backed away, my hip hitting the desk. The pain was sharp, grounding, real in a moment when nothing else felt solid. It started that way, he admitted, his voice rough. But, Isabella, what I feel now, what we've become, that's real. I swear to you, is built on my father's grave. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself, my other hand instinctively protecting my stomach. Our baby. Christo, we'd made a baby while he was keeping these secrets, while my father's blood was still fresh on his hands. I didn't want to hurt you, Dominic said, and something in his voice sounded genuine. But I couldn't lose the territory. Couldn't risk another family moving in before the transition was secure. Your father understood that. He approved it. He approved his own murder. He approved securing his legacy. Dominic's hands flexed at his sides, that barely restrained violence I'd seen before rising to the surface. And Marcus, he continued. Marcus was going to destroy everything. Was going to tell you before you were ready to hear it, before you understood the bigger picture. I couldn't let that happen. So you killed him too. I protected us. The statement hung between us, simple and horrifying. He'd killed 2 men and called it protection. Had manipulated my grief, my loneliness, my desperate need to be wanted, all in service of his empire. I need to leave, I said, moving toward the door. His hand shot out, catching my wrist, stopping me. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to terrify. You're not leaving. Watch me. I will burn this city down before I let you walk away. His gray eyes had gone cold, that mask of control sliding back into place. You're mine, Isabella. Mine. This baby is mine. Everything you are, everything you'll ever be, is mine. And I will do whatever it takes, destroy whoever I need to, kill anyone who tries to help you, because losing you is not an option I can survive. To control me, I whispered, finally understanding. To own me. That's all this ever was. I wrenched my wrist free and ran. Through the penthouse, my heels clicking on marble, my vision blurred with tears. The elevator seemed miles away, but I made it, slamming my hand on the button, watching the doors slide closed on Dominic's devastated expression. He reached out like he could pull me back through sheer force of will. I didn't trust it. I didn't trust anything anymore. The elevator descended, and I made plans. My father had 1 man left, 1 connection Dominic hadn't absorbed. Carlo, who'd been Vincent's driver for 30 years, who'd loved him like a brother. If anyone would help me disappear, it would be him. I called from the lobby. Carlo, I need you. Now. Don't tell anyone. He picked me up 2 blocks from the penthouse, driving a nondescript sedan instead of the usual town car. His weathered face creased with concern when he saw me crying, saw the fear in my eyes. What happened, Piccola? Just drive. Please. Somewhere Dominic won't think to look. He took me to a safe house in Queens, an apartment my father had maintained for emergencies. Small, secure, stocked with supplies and untraceable cash. Carlo made me tea while I cried, while I explained everything, while I tried to make sense of the wreckage my life had become. You need to run, Carlo said finally. New identity. New city. I have contacts in California who can help. I'm pregnant. The admission made it real. Made the situation impossibly complicated. I couldn't just run. Couldn't just disappear when I was carrying Dominic's child. When the baby growing inside me bound me to him in ways that went beyond marriage or empire. Then you need to be smart, Carlo said gently. Dominic will be hunting. He won't stop. Men like him, they don't know how to lose. He was right. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Dominic's empire fracture through news reports and whispered phone calls. He turned the city inside out looking for me. Made brutal examples of anyone who might be helping me, his legendary control crumbling into the violence he'd always kept leashed. 3 men die in those 2 weeks. Just executed, no trial, no questions, because Dominic suspected they knew where I was. Their families got envelopes of cash and quiet funerals, compensation for being caught in the crossfire of a powerful man's obsession. The other families noticed. Started circling like sharks, scenting blood in the water. If Dominic was distracted, if his attention was split between business and finding his runaway wife, maybe there were opportunities. Territory that could be claimed. Power that could be seized. The messages started on day 3. Texts from numbers I didn't recognize, but knew were him. They're targeting you because you're my weakness. Come back and I'll tell you everything. The truth. All of it. I deleted them without responding. I can't protect you if you won't let me. I blocked the numbers, but new ones kept appearing. He was relentless, desperate, fragmenting in real time. I love you. Cristo, help me, Isabella. I love you, and I don't know how to make you believe it. I threw my phone across the room. Let him suffer. Let him feel what it was like to lose something he thought he owned. But on the 14th night, 3 men broke into the safe house. I woke to the sound of the door being kicked in, Carlo shouting from the front room, gunfire that made my ears ring. I grabbed the gun he'd left on my nightstand, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The bedroom door exploded inward. A man I didn't recognize, young and mean-looking, with a gun trained on my chest. Mrs. Russo, he said, his smile cold. The Costello family sends its regards. Not Dominic's men. Rivals. Enemies who'd identified his weakness and come to exploit it. I raised my gun, but my hands were trembling too badly. The man laughed, crossing the room, reaching for me. I heard more gunfire from the front room, heard Carlo cry out, heard footsteps and shouting, and the sound of my own heartbeat deafening in my ears. The man's hand closed around my wrist, and I screamed. The bullet entered his skull from behind, spattering blood across the wall beside me. He dropped instantly, his body crumpling, revealing Dominic standing in the doorway. He looked like an avenging angel. Blood spattered across his white shirt, his face cold and focused, the gun in his hand steady as he tracked across the room looking for more threats. 2 more bodies lay in the hallway behind him. Carlo's body lay near the front door. Dominic's eyes found mine, and something in them broke open. Raw fear and desperate relief, and something that looked almost like love if love could be this violent and consuming. He crossed to me in 3 strides, pulling me against his chest with bruising force. His whole body was shaking, his heartbeat wild against my ear. Cristo, he breathed into my hair. When I got Carlo's alert, when I realized they'd found you, I thought. He didn't finish, but I understood. He'd thought I was dead. Thought he'd lost me permanently, irrevocably, in a way that no amount of power or violence could reverse. You killed Carlo, I said numbly, staring at the old man's body. He sent me the location. Dominic pulled back enough to look at me, his hands framing my face. The moment he realized you were in danger, he called me, told me to get here, before it was too late. He died protecting you. Buy me time to arrive. Tears streamed down my face. Why? Why would he help you after what you did? Because he loved your father. Because he understood what your father understood. That in our world, love and violence are the same thing. That protection means doing terrible things to keep the people you love safe. I should pull away. Should hate him for the murders, the manipulation, the lies. But his hands were gentle despite the blood on them. His eyes devastated despite the bodies he'd just made. You came, I whispered. Always. His forehead pressed against mine, both of us breathing hard, both of us covered in other people's blood. I told you, you're mine to protect, even from myself, even from the consequences of my own actions. I can't forgive you. I know. I can't trust you. I know. But I can't survive without you either. The admission broke something in both of us. Dominic's kiss was desperate, almost violent, tasting of blood and fear and something darker than love. I kissed him back with equal fervor, hating him and needing him in equal measure. We have to go, he said finally, pulling away. The Costello family will send more. I need to get you somewhere actually safe. Where's safe when the most dangerous thing in my life is you? His laugh was bitter. Nowhere. There's nowhere safe for me, Isabella. But I can make everywhere else more dangerous for anyone who tries to hurt you. He helped me pack the few things I had, his body between me and the door the entire time. We stepped over bodies on our way out, and I didn't look at Carlo. Couldn't bear to see the man who'd loved my father dead because he tried to save me. The drive back to Manhattan was silent. Dominic's hand never left mine, his grip almost painful, like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. The penthouse looked exactly the same. Like I'd never left. Like the past 2 weeks of running and hiding and watching Dominic's empire fracture had never happened. I stood in the living room, blood still on my nightgown, trembling from adrenaline crash, and realized the horrible truth. I'd become his salvation, the thing he needed to stay human, to maintain whatever control kept him from becoming the monster he was capable of being. And he'd become my damnation, the man who'd murdered my father and manipulated my heart, but who I couldn't survive without. We were bound now, not by marriage or pregnancy or even love, but by mutual destruction. Neither of us could exist without the other anymore. Dominic stood across the room watching me with that complicated expression, guilt and longing and possession mixed together. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "for all of it, for killing your father, for lying to you, for thinking I could control what I felt that I started this as a transaction and ended up trapped by my own design." The apology changed nothing. We both knew that. "I'm not going anywhere," I said quietly. "Not because I forgive you. Not because I trust you. But because you're right. In this world, I'm always a target. And you're the only one dangerous enough to protect me. And the baby?" His eyes dropped to my stomach, still flat enough that the pregnancy wasn't visible. "We'll grow up knowing that love and violence are the same thing. Just like we do." Something like pain crossed his face. "I wanted better for our child." "Then you shouldn't have built our foundation on blood." I crossed him, standing close enough to feel his heat, to see the exhaustion and fear and desperate need in his eyes. "But we're here now, bound by choice and consequence. So tell me, Dominic, what happens next?" His hands found my waist, pulling me against him with careful reverence. "Now I spend every day proving that the obsession is real. That what started as manipulation became something I can't control. That you didn't just become my salvation. You became the only thing I'd burn the world to keep. And if I can't forgive you, then I'll earn it. Every day, for the rest of our lives, I'll earn it." We stood there in the wreckage of our marriage, both covered in blood, both knowing the truth. This wasn't love. Not the soft, gentle kind that romance novels promised. This was something darker, more consuming, built on violence and betrayal and mutual need. But it was ours. And, in our world, maybe that was the only kind of love that survived. The weeks that followed were strange and terrible, and somehow more honest than anything that had come before. Dominic kept his word. He earned my trust inch by painful inch, day by excruciating day. He told me everything. Not just about my father and Marcus, but about every decision he'd made, every territory he controlled, every alliance he'd forged. He opened his empire to me like a book, letting me see the blood and the strategy and the ruthless calculations that kept us alive. I learned how to read his ledgers, how to identify threats, how to recognize when someone was lying. I sat in on meetings with the other families, Dominic's hand possessive at my waist, his message clear. "She knows everything. She's not just my wife, she's my partner. Touch her and you're declaring war on both of us." The baby grew inside me, a constant reminder of what bound us together. We'd lie in bed at night, his hand on my swelling stomach, and talk about the future we were building. Not the fantasy future I dreamed of before, but the real one. The one where our child would grow up in this world, knowing its darkness, learning to survive it. "You're going to be an amazing mother," he'd whisper in the darkness. "Better than I deserve. I'm going to be a realistic mother," I'd correct. "I'm going to teach our baby that love isn't soft. That protection sometimes looks like violence. That the people who claim to care about you are often the most dangerous." He'd pull me closer, his arms tight around me, his face buried in my hair. "And I'll teach them that sometimes the people who hurt you are the only ones who can save you." The city settled back into its rhythms. The Costello family was eliminated brutally and efficiently, a message to anyone else who thought Dominic's moment of weakness was an opportunity. The other families fell back in line, recognizing that his obsession with me hadn't made him weaker. If anything, it had made him more dangerous. Because now he had something to protect. Something worth burning the world for. And everyone knew it. My stomach grew round and heavy. Dominic became impossibly gentle, treating me like I was made of spun glass, even as he conducted his brutal business around me. He'd kill a man in the morning and spend the evening reading parenting books, his hand on my belly, feeling our daughter kick. We'd learned it was a girl. He'd cried when the ultrasound tech told us, actual tears streaming down his face, his control completely shattered. A daughter, he'd whispered, his hand reverently touching the screen, showing our baby's profile. Christo, Isabella, we made a daughter. I'd watched him fall apart and put himself back together. Watched him transform from the cold man I'd married to something more complicated. Not better, necessarily. Just more human. More real. More mine. The night before I went into labor, we sat on the penthouse balcony overlooking the city. Manhattan spread out below us like a glittering web, beautiful and deadly, full of people who would kill us if they could. Do you regret it? Dominic asked quietly, his arm around my shoulders. Any of it? I thought about the question, about the arranged marriage and the invisible months, and the discovery of his crimes. About running and being hunted and the bodies piled up in our wake. About the love built on lies that had somehow transformed into something terrifyingly real. I regret that it had to happen this way, I said, finally. I regret the pain and the blood and the people who died. But regret what we've become? No, I don't regret that. Because this, I gestured between us, at my swollen belly, at the city below, is the only honest thing I've ever had. You're the only person who's ever seen me completely and not looked away. His arms tightened around me. You're the only person I've ever let see me completely. That makes us either the luckiest people alive or the most damned. Both, I said. Definitely both. He laughed, the sound rough and genuine, and kissed the top of my head. I love you, Isabella Russo. I love you too, I whispered back, and meant it. Not despite what he'd done, but because of what we'd survived together. Not in spite of the darkness, but because we'd learned to live in it without losing ourselves completely. Our daughter was born on a snowy December morning, screaming her fury at the world from her first breath. Dominic held her with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face, whispering promises about protection and love, and how he'd burn the world to keep her safe. She has your eyes, I said, watching our daughter blink up at her father with those same stormy gray eyes. Thank Christo, she has your heart, he replied, pressing a kiss to her tiny forehead. Mine would be too cold. We named her Elena, after his grandmother, the woman who'd taught him that strength and softness could exist together. She was perfect. 10 perfect fingers, 10 perfect toes, and a set of lungs that announced she was a force to be reckoned with. Just like her mother, Dominic said, looking at me with so much love it hurt. And just like her father, I countered, taking her from him to feed her. Stubborn and dangerous and absolutely impossible to ignore. We brought her home to the penthouse we'd transformed from a prison into something resembling a home. The nursery was ready, painted soft gray with white furniture, a compromise between his need for security and my desire for warmth. Family came to visit, carefully vetted, bringing gifts and congratulations and calculating eyes. They looked at Elena and saw the next generation of Russo power. They looked at me and saw what I'd become. Not just Dominic's wife, but his partner, his equal, the woman who'd survived discovering his darkest secrets and chosen to stay anyway. We were parents now, responsible for this tiny life who depended on us completely. It should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like the final piece clicking into place. This was what we'd been building toward. Not just empire or power or revenge, but this. Family. Legacy. Something that would outlast the blood and violence and complicated history. That night, after the visitors had left and Elena was sleeping in her crib, Dominic and I stood together in the nursery doorway, watching our daughter breathe. Do you remember what you said? He asked quietly. When you first found the letters, that everything we had was built on your father's grave. I remembered. The words had been daggers, meant to wound, and they had. Yes. He turned to look at me, his expression serious. You were right. Everything we have is built on blood and lies and terrible choices. But Isabella, he gestured to our sleeping daughter, She doesn't have to be. We can give her something better. We can show her that love doesn't have to be this complicated, this dark. I studied his face, seeing the hope there, fragile and new. You think we can break the cycle? I think we can try. He pulled me close, his arms solid around me. I think we owe it to her to try. Maybe he was right. Maybe we could give Elena something better than what we'd had. Maybe love didn't have to be built on violence and survival. Maybe it could just be love. Or maybe we were lying to ourselves again, creating another beautiful fiction to justify the darkness we lived in. Either way, we'd find out together. Because that's what we were now. Partners in crime and parenthood. Bound by blood and choice, and the tiny life sleeping peacefully between us. Dominic kissed me then, slow and sweet, tasting of hope and possibility and all the things we'd never thought we'd have. And I kissed him back, choosing him again, choosing this life, choosing to believe that sometimes salvation and damnation were the same thing. Outside, the city glittered like broken glass, beautiful and dangerous, full of people who would come for us eventually. But inside, in our fortress of marble and bulletproof glass, we were safe. For now. For tonight. And maybe that was enough. This is where some stories end. I'd said at the beginning. But we're just getting started. Hit subscribe if you need more stories that don't let you go, that remind you that obsession and salvation are two sides of the same coin, that some loves are built on lies, and some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud. I'll be here, waiting with more stories that understand that darkness isn't the opposite of love. It's just love with all the pretense stripped away. Because, in the end, that's what Dominic and I had learned. Love isn't always soft. It isn't always kind. Sometimes it's built on blood and wrapped in violence and born from the worst possible circumstances. But it's still love. Still real. Still worth fighting for. And we would fight. For each other, for Elena, for the future we were building one complicated day at a time. We'd fight until there was nothing left to fight for, or nothing left of us to do the fighting. That was our promise, our vow, not the ones we'd spoken at our wedding, empty words in an empty ceremony, but the real ones, the ones we'd forged in blood and terror and desperate need, till death do us part, and maybe not even then.